Before I start, I've actually written down what I want to talk about, but before I start, I just wanted to kind of give you some context, because once upon a time, I did public speaking. Once upon a time, I could stand up and talk for half an hour about something without having to read it, but unfortunately today, my memory doesn't do that anymore, so I've written this down, and hopefully I'll be able to look at you whilst I'm doing it, but just to give you a little bit of context. So, it's strange to be here today talking. Strange because it's almost 2 years to the day that I became poorly with encephalitis. I'm a teacher, and it was half term. And as a family, we'd planned to go and see a children's ballet with our daughter India in Leeds. And we'd decided to stay in Harrogate. I was exhausted, as the September-October half term always makes me feel. And so when we travelled up to Harrogate, I was tired and I felt like I was coming down with the flu. As the day went on, I felt more exhausted and flu-y to the point that we arranged an emergency appointment with the GP in Harrogate. And she was pretty convinced it was nothing more than the flu, but that I needed lots of rest. So instead of staying, we decided to drive home so that I could sleep in my own bed and not worry about the ballet in the morning. The following morning, my husband Paul took me to my own GP, whose words were, "I think you're the first real case of flu this year." So I went home with paracetamol and an order of rest. The following 24 hours, I barely remember. I vaguely recall going to a car garage just outside of Nottingham, but it's all jumbled up in my head. And then the next 24 hours becomes a blur. Apparently, I was making little sense, talking gobbledygook and not being at all logical with my speech. I vaguely remember trying to explain things that I'd said, and they had no relevance to what I was thinking. I do remember the GP telling Paul that there wasn't anything that they could do and that he had to take me to hospital, but beyond that point, I don't remember a lot. A very busy A&E, lots of beds, closing my eyes a lot as my head hurt as much as it did when I'd had meningitis the year before. The doctors wondered if it was meningitis, but that would have been sheer bad luck given that I'd already had it once. But they apparently did all of that. But they apparently did all the tests, ECGs, lumbar punctures, etc., to see what was going on. And apart from fragments of that, I don't really recall much else. I know that I ended up on one ward, then I was transferred to another. I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I think I slept more than I was awake. They treated me for meningitis with acyclovir, which was fortunate because when my lumbar puncture results came back, they showed that I had acute herpes simplex encephalitis, and the treatment's the same. I've got vague recollections of the first week, and I have more vivid recollections of the second week in hospital. I remember a group of doctors standing around me and talking in a foreign medical speak language, and me not really knowing what was going on, not even really what was the matter with me. I just either slept or pretended that I was fine, even though I couldn't find the words for things when they asked me questions, which they were doing to establish where I was in terms of cognition and whether I had any significant brain damage. I can't really narrate the rest of that stay. It was emotional in some ways. I just wanted to be at home with India, but I was so ill that they wouldn't let me come home even when I petitioned them to let me go. Nearly a month later, and when they'd finished the extended course of acyclovir, I was released, and it felt unreal. My friend Isla picked me up from the hospital and drove me home at 9 p.m. so that Paul didn't have to bring India with him to do the same job. As for the next few weeks, I was adamant that I was okay, that I wanted to go back to work as soon as possible. I didn't really have any sense of what encephalitis was or how it had affected me. I just knew that I had to keep going and I needed to get back to work. Paul, on the other hand, had other ideas. He'd looked online and he'd researched encephalitis. He knew the effects it could have and the high mortality rate of the illness, and I know now that he was terrified. Meanwhile, I just felt like I was letting everyone down. India, Paul, school, my family. I had no real concept of what I'd been through or the lasting impact that it was going to have on me. Those immediate months after being in hospital were not straightforward. Whilst I wanted to be normal, I suffered daily, intense migraines, sometimes 3 times a day, and there was a question mark over whether these were epileptic microseizures. As a result, I'd been given the treatment drug for epilepsy that has known capacity for causing low mood, definitely not what I needed. Fortunately, and in retrospect, These migraines were just that, migraines, and my brain recovering from the damage it had suffered with the encephalitis. Fortunately, I rarely get migraines anymore, and I haven't taken anti-epileptic medication for well over a year now, and a more recent EEG scan showed no visible signs of epilepsy, thankfully. Other noticeable after effects that I found really frustrating were losing track of what I was saying mid-sentence, almost like my brain had been wiped, and I had no sense of where I came from or where I was heading with what I was saying. Perhaps particularly frustrating for someone whose strength with words has always been a key part of my identity. And on top of this, an overwhelming fatigue. Don't get me wrong, I've always needed a good night's sleep, but suddenly I needed naps in the day and early nights, bed by 9 every night. And to some extent, this is still something I'm battling to this day. 3 months after my discharge from Queen's Medical Centre and the intense herpes simplex treatment that I'd had, I saw a private specialist via Paul's work health insurance. Don't get me wrong, I can't fault the NHS, but I think encephalitis is so uncommon that they really don't know which path to take. And so there was a lot of shuffling going on post-discharge. And I think when I saw this specialist, it was the first time that it hit me how severely unwell that I'd been. The doctor I saw was, strangely, the father of a little girl I had taught, so we'd met before, which was a bit strange realising that he could see my medical history and everything that that entailed. Fortunately, he was really professional and empathic too, which was a relief. He ordered a brain scan, which showed significant brain damage as a result of the infection, and I think that this marked the beginning of a real downward spiral. I felt broken, lost, and pointless, and I don't think I've ever felt so low in my life. I felt like a shadow of who I'd been. I felt, and I still feel this, that I'd lost the one thing that was unwavering in my past, my intelligence. I couldn't communicate with anyone about how I was feeling, and this just came out as self-hatred and general negativity towards life. When I tried and failed to go back to work after Easter 2018, I was in the lowest point of my life. I had to keep on being a mummy, but apart from that, I was a complete failure and felt totally broken. It's hard because I wanted this talk to be positive, but I also feel like I have to be honest about what I've been through. Encephalitis has knocked me for 6, and there isn't a day go by when I don't actively notice the impact it's had on me. My undergraduate degree was in English from Cambridge University, and never have I said this as many times as I have done since the encephalitis. I never used to brag about this academic achievement, and so, as a primary teacher, few people knew this about me until the last couple of years. But now I say it more frequently than I've ever said it, to prove that I was once clever. Post-encephalitis, as a primary school teacher, there's been numerous hurdles to overcome, and the biggest one, and the one that trips me up every single day, is learning names. Once upon a time, I could learn 32 names in little over 24 hours. I felt that it was really important for me to be able to recognise the children in my class and talk to them like they matter. Fast forward to post-encephalitis, and this is something that I find really difficult. 30 children in front of me, and my short-term memory struggles to recall their names from 1 minute to the next. 1 minute I'll know it, the next minute it's gone. I find it so frustrating. But, and here's the but, I am finding ways to cope. I've steadily realised that my visual memory is better than my auditory memory, and so I'm using this. In my classroom, on a door opposite my desk, and behind where the children sit when I'm teaching them on the carpet, I have pictures of all of the children in my class. They're pictures that I took, which feels like it's important, as I created the images. And under the pictures are their names, large enough that I can read them easily. Somehow this is helping enormously. Not because I constantly have to check who is who, but because seeing their names next to their pictures becomes an image that I can see in my head, even when I can't see the board. For example, a little boy in my class called George. His picture is of him smiling cheekily, but every time I forget his name, which happens all the time, I can visualise in my head that photo and his name written under it, and all of a sudden, I know it again. Having been back at work for nearly a year now, this is a new learning for me, but it's a positive and one that I'm pretty pleased with myself about. Even this isn't without its challenges. I can't tell you how many 5-year-olds have giggled at me over the last half term because when we were reading Snow White and retelling the story, I kept calling Snow White Goldilocks or Cinderella or another name from another fairy tale. The children couldn't see into my mixed-up brain, whereas I could practically feel these nouns swimming around in there. But children are remarkable. They laugh at me, but in a nice way, and this makes it feel all right. It's not without its struggles, but I feel like I'm getting there. The Encephalitis Society have been amazing for us as a family. In that period, that first period post-illness, they were on the phone whenever we needed it, and they've sent us some really invaluable information that's really helped. Unfortunately, they can't cure the lasting and fairly significant damage to my brain, but it's helped enormously to know that there are other people out there going through the same thing. Encephalitis has rocked my world. It's rocked my family's world. I'm not the same person I was before I had it, and it hasn't been easy to adjust to. My family have been amazing, but it hasn't been without its complications. My daughter was only 2 when it happened. Now she's just turned 4. There are things that I struggle with, remembering what nursery tell me she's done that day, remembering what she's just done, and explaining this. Short-term memory can be a real issue. Encephalitis has challenged us as a family, and at points post-encephalitis I was so low that I couldn't see a future, and the frustration that I felt often made itself felt in conflicts with my husband Paul. And it's challenged us to the edge of what we can cope with, but I feel like we're getting there. I won't ever forgive encephalitis for damaging my brain, my self-esteem, or the impact that it's had on our family dynamic. Paul became a carer, and our balance was thrown off kilter. I can say all this now, and I haven't really talked about it openly, but we, as a married couple, have been to the edge. Fortunately, I can add and back again to that, but not without focused repair. We've been incredibly lucky to see an amazing counsellor through Relate who really gets us. She really does. She can see the imbalance in our relationship has been created not just by encephalitis but other things too, and she challenges to adjust our expectations and relations and outcomes as a result. I don't think we would be here at this conference today if it weren't for her insight and compassion. She's brought us back from breaking point, a breaking point that was at least partly caused by encephalitis. Because Paul has been there for me throughout, the imbalance at times has been really difficult to adjust to. Paul at times has been the carer and me the cared for, and whilst I appreciate this, it's also not easy to accept, and it's left me feeling powerless at times. And I repeat this, we've come a long way. We've worked hard together with some amazing support from Jasmine, our counsellor, amongst others. We're more of a team now, we're a balanced team. The encephalitis has not and will not destroy our relationship or our family, but it's not been easy. I wanted to come here today and talk about it, encephalitis, answer questions, try to be positive, but it's massive. There are good days and there are bad days. There are longer-term implications of acquired brain injury and the exhaustion that I'm left with, but I'm getting through, and that's got to be something. Thank you.